If you're a pop culture junkie who loves TV, film, music, comedy, and other really important stuff, then you've come to the right place. Get ready and settle in for Classic Conversations, the best pop culture interviews in the world. That's right, we circled the globe so you don't have to. If you're ready to be the king of the water cooler, then you're ready for Classic Conversations with your host, Jeff Dwoskin.
All right, Katey, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. You get the show going each and every week, and this week was no exception. Welcome, everybody, to episode 338 of Classic Conversations. As always, I am your host, Jeff Dwoskin. Great to have you back for what's sure to be a shocking episode as we dive deep into the world of Married with Children. My guest today is Richard Gurman. He worked on Married with Children. He was a showrunner for Married with Children. He was there for pretty much the entire run and has written the book, Married with Children versus the World, the inside story of the shock-com that launched Fox and changed TV comedy forever. We're diving deep, and that's coming up in just a few seconds. And in these few seconds, do not miss my incredible conversation with Jerry Jewell, cousin Jerry from The Facts of Life. That's right. Amazing conversation last week. Do not miss it. But right now, do not miss my amazing conversation with Richard Gurman. He's worked on classics like Happy Days, Laverne Shirley, Mork and Mindy. We touch on those, his time with Gary Marshall, and then dive deep into the world of Married with Children. And that's coming up right now. All right, everyone. I am excited to introduce my next guest, producer, writer, author. Worked on such classics as Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, Mork and Mindy, Different Strokes, Married with Children. Facts of Life. And now, author of Married with Children versus the World, the inside story of the shock-com that launched Fox and changed TV forever. That was dramatic enough? Okay. Welcome to the show, Richard Gurman.
It's nice to be here, Jeff.
So amazing run and book on Married with Children. Thanks for sharing it with me. It was quite a run. It's quite an iconic show, and you've captured it very nicely.
Thank you.
But if we can we build up to that for a second? Because
Sure.
You worked on pretty much everything that I love. Working up to that, and including that.
I did that in anticipation of this interview.
I appreciate you dedicating your life to this moment. Well, first of all, what kind of led to just getting into the entertainment field, becoming a producer, writer? Like, when did you know you had the skills? Is it something you always wanted to do? Was there something that inspired you early on?
It's interesting. I always wanted to be a writer. You know, when you have that class in elementary school, what do you want to be when you grow up? I always wanted to be a writer. And then I just kind of put all of that aside, and I went to school and studied sociology, undergraduate. And then I went to graduate school of journalism at UC Berkeley, and we had an emphasis on documentary filmmaking. I chose the emphasis on documentary public affairs filmmaking. And from my master's thesis, I made a documentary, and it got on the air. And I came to Los Angeles in the early 70s to interview for what I thought was my career in documentary filmmaking. And I had interviews set up with various documentary and news organizations and so on. And then strangely, my resume for the interviews got sent to somebody at a sitcom. A friend of one of the people that I was supposed to interview with gave it to somebody who was the executive producer of, and your audience probably won't remember this show. It's called The Partridge Family, starring David Cassidy,
My audience will absolutely know that show.
Okay, there you go.
You're in the sweet spot. Keep going.
Okay. So, it's about a family that was also a rock band or rock-ish band, starring David Cassidy, who was a huge teen idol at the time. So I didn't get any of the other jobs, and I got the job to work as assistant to the producer of The Partridge Family. And I figured I'll move to Los Angeles with a job, and then I'll pursue my documentary career. Long story short, I got involved in the show, and they were very inclusive, and I got involved in story meetings and in the writing and so on. And so I really took to the sitcom writing form. And I did what every other aspiring sitcom writer or any form of writing, television writer would do. I wrote a spec script, got it to the right people, and I ended up in a Gary Marshall, and who your audience probably also knows, Happy Days, Laverne Shirley, Pretty Woman, lots of films, lots of TV shows, had an apprenticeship program. And he had full staff of writers, and he would also bring on 3 or 4 apprentices on each show. And the theory was to grow your own, to teach young writers the craft according to Gary Marshall, according to what his needs were and his theories were. And when you did well in that, then you got promoted up and wrote on his shows, which I did. So then I started writing for Laverne and Shirley and then Happy Days. As a freelance writer back in the day at that time, you were lucky if your show went 2 or 3 years and you got to stay with it. Otherwise, you jump from show to show. Your show gets sometimes your shows that your audience would never have heard of that was on for like 6 episodes, and then you'd be off. So I was lucky enough to be on some long-running shows. And then I went over to Norman Lear's company, he of All in the Family fame and Maude and all that. And I worked on a show called Different Strokes, and I worked on a show called Facts of Life. And I kind of ran afoul of the Facts of Life folks. I had kind of an incident with them, and I quit the show. And when I quit that show, I found myself out of work. And the executive producers and creators of Married with Children handed me a script for this series that was going to go on the new Fox network. And they said, "Are you interested?" And I read it, and I was interested like crazy. It was just off the charts, different, intentionally different, because we were trying to gain an audience that wasn't on the traditional networks. That's the story of how I got to Married with Children and how I started out in television.
It's quite a resume. And I'm like, you can see behind me, I got Henry Winkler, I got Cindy Williams on the wall. So, I...
For the occasion.
It's my whole office is like is autographs.
They were terrific. Penny and Cindy were amazing. As difficult and irascible as they were just fantastic and comedic geniuses. And it was like going to college for comedy, to being writing for Gary Marshall and working on those shows. So yeah, appreciate the shout out to those shows.
Mork and Mindy, then, were you on set with Robin Williams? I mean, is that?
I was Mork and Mindy. I just wrote an episode as a freelance writer, so I wasn't on the set with Robin Williams. I was there maybe part of the week when my show was being shot, and I have friends who were on that show who just had just amazing stories about Robin and how he just cracked everybody up and how he changed all the lines and made them work and so on and so forth. But I don't have a lot of personal experience with Robin. No, more on Happy Days and Laverne. Later
in 2020, you had made the Happy Days of Gary Marshall documentary.
Yes.
So that must have been nice, kind of wrapping up, kind of a bookend to the...
It was very nice. When I sort of finished my sitcom writing career, I went back to my documentary roots I did a documentary on Bob Hope for PBS. And then I had the opportunity with this fellow, John Scheinfeld, who's a well-known documentary director, to sell this documentary to ABC on Gary Marshall. And part of that was because I think it's vastly entertaining. He just, dominated the TV world and the film world with everything. Princess Bride and Pretty Woman and Princess Diaries. I mean, not Princess Bride. And part of it was because I wanted to kind of connect my documentary training to all the sitcom work that I had done. And part of it was to give back to Gary Marshall, who had given me and so many other people opportunities in the business. And in a certain sense, jumping ahead, the Married with Children book is the same spirit of sort of giving back to the show that launched my career and so on. So the Gary Marshall thing, you cannot believe everyone, Richard Gere, Henry Winkler, Pam Dauber, Julia Roberts, everyone came in from everywhere to be interviewed. I mean, they were knocking on our doors to be interviewed. Usually you have to go say, please, please, please be in our show. But everybody wanted to pay homage to Gary, and it was a real pleasure. So it was great.
That's amazing. Quite a testament to him. And then the only other thing I want to cover before we jump into Married with Children.
Sure.
The Love Boat, because that's one of my favorite shows.
I wrote wrote one episode,
One segment. I know, with the Temptations.
one single episode.
I know. I love it.
And I think it was supposed to be about the Temptations, and it ended up being about the Beach Boys, one or the other. I don't know. I had a connection there. Some people that I worked with that were on the Partridge Family were running the show, and I used that connection to get an episode of The Love Boat. It was fun, and I still get residuals from that show, which kind of lives forever. I actually have a friend who Jim Colucci, who writes a lot of these TV books, who's just finishing up a Love Boat book. So that's coming out soon.
Oh, I've had Isaac Gopher and Doc on the show. So
bet.
Charlotte Ray may not have been in that segment, but she was on that episode, and so was Ted McGinley.
Yeah, well, Ted McGinley, 3 shows with Ted McGinley, really, for me. Happy Days, A Love Boat, and of course, Married with Children.
That's right. He came on the Happy Days later on, didn't he? That's right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Big time.
Oh, and then you did the Brady Brides too. That was, we don't have to say it.
And that was just an episode.
But you touched on that, New Leave It to Beaver, all the classics. Every show I've grown up with, one way or another,
Well, boy, you've certainly done your research. So there you go. When you are, and I don't know how it is now, the kids today, in the industry, but when you're a freelance writer in television, there's no year to year. You're basically on a show until the show gets canceled or you get fired. If you're lucky enough, as I was, to be on shows that ran for a long time, then you have some job security. But otherwise, you're back to pounding the pavement and writing another spec script and selling yourself over and over and over and over again. I mean, in some ways, it's a fantastic life. It's really great to be on those writing staff. In other ways, it's pretty insecure.
You had some good ones. Dog with the Blog was very popular, I know, as well. But that was a little, my kids were older, so I missed that one.
Kids were older, and what Disney, it was nice in kind of my later years when I wasn't getting as much work on network television shows. Disney was in the business of doing the multi-camera sitcom, just like we did that. Nobody does it anymore, hardly, a couple of shows. So they were keeping the multi-camera sitcom alive. So they didn't mind hiring people like me who had some experience with it. So Dog with the Blog was actually a lot of fun.
All right. Now we have an incident with Facts of Life. We'll let people read the book to get the full story, but that led you to leave Facts of Life.
Yes.
And this is just tying into the earlier you were saying, and Ron and Michael approach you, the creators of Married with Children.
Yes.
And that is the beginning of our story.
Right.
Now, you were with Married with Children for almost every season, but you took, I think it's normal, right? You were there the first few seasons, then you came back. You left for a few.
I took first few seasons and did a show that you didn't mention, which maybe I shouldn't. I don't know. I did the TV version of Uncle Buck.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I had that written down. Yeah. Okay.
And then after a couple of years, then I came back to Married with Children and stayed for the rest of the run. So I was there from the very beginning, before we even did the pilot. I was really there on the ground floor. So
you're legit OG. So, but it's normal. I remember talking to the people who were early on at The Simpsons, and then even like Al Jean and them. Then they leave and they did The Critic, then they come back. I mean, it's a normal thing.
Yeah.
How did they sway you away though to do Uncle Buck?
Money. What happens is you reach a certain plateau. I was supervising producer or whatever on Married with Children. And then, your star is ascending. It's like your credits. And so they offered me a 2-year overall deal. So, and then it was working on Uncle Buck. And if that gets canceled, I still have a deal to stay there and work in development. It was nice. I mean, I was sorry to leave, but it was a really good opportunity. And I ran that show. I wasn't running Married with Children. So it was a career opportunity as well as a financial opportunity. And so I took it.
Love it. All right. So Married with Children. So you've come from Gary Marshall, Norman Lear, what we would consider, Norman Lear had some edgier shows as well, but this is now going to redefine, All in the Family and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Now we're about to embark. Fox is brand new. What made you want to, was it just the excitement for everyone involved, just to kind of completely take a shift?
Yes, it was partly, it was the excitement and the freedom. What Fox did, they launched a new network in an era where there hadn't been a new network in 50 years. And so ABC, CBS, and NBC were just dominating and there were entrenched viewing habits. And the other thing that some of your viewers will know and some younger ones won't, it wasn't like such a thing as streaming. Like you could watch your show at any time that you wanted to. You could sit down and punch it up. So it was called linear television. So in order to launch a new network, to get people to watch you, you had to do something different to get people. That was Fox's theory. If we do something really different, we can get people away from their viewing habits on NBC, CBS, and ABC. It wasn't automatic for Fox to get people the level of Jim Brooks and Ed Weinberger and Levitt and Moy to come work for them, because they had huge salaries on networks where their work would be seen by millions, guaranteed to be seen by millions of people. To work for Fox, you were taking a chance. You were taking a chance that your show might break out. So to incentivize these top writer producers to work for them, they gave them creative freedom. You could do essentially what you want with very little censorship, and also guaranteed episodes on the air. So instead of doing a pilot, and this factors in largely later with the casting of Ben O'Neill, but instead of doing a pilot and then you get thrown in with 70 other pilots and they maybe pick 5 or 6 to put on the air, you were guaranteed 13 on the air. So that's why Ron and Michael wanted to. Ron and Michael, as much as they had traditional backgrounds like me, they worked on the Jeffersons, they worked on Silver Spoons, they worked on shows like that. They were very iconoclastic. They were, a lot of writers are rebellious, but you do the job. These guys were particularly rebellious, and they hated formula television where everybody hugs at the end of an episode and everybody learns something. So Ron and Michael set out to do really an anti-sitcom. It was called We're Not the Cosbys, was a name for it at first. It didn't stick. But so they came to me and they said, we've written this out-of-the-box comedy. You want to take a chance with us and do this? And I was out of work and I read it and I loved it. And I said, hell yes. So that was the beginning of my involvement with the show. I was deeply attracted to the material. Let's put it that way. And I had some faith that it was a crapshoot. I had no idea it would take off. Nobody did, and it didn't take off for quite a while. That was my entry point.
It was interesting because, like, when I was reading the book, I lived through linear television and that whole idea. So the show was 87. And so
right.
It wouldn't even be it would be a decade before DVDs are coming out, and then TV on DVDs where people could binge. That was like the start of binge watching, where you could start to experience things you may have missed. But yeah, This was like the whole counter programming thing and all that. It was great insight. And I know there's a good story coming up. And I'm from Michigan, by the way, so I know that ties in. So coming to you from Michigan, where I guess one of our people saved the show in a way.
That's a way to go under it.
I'm being hired by the Michigan PR folks to spin it. It was interesting, like the whole casting process, how that you talk about that they took the pitch literally originally. This is Sam Kinison, and what if Sam Kinison and Roseanne got married? And then okay, and they took that pretty literal.
The initial pitch is called an elevator pitch. It's what a writer puts together a way in 30 seconds where you can sort of understand the concept. And the elevator pitch was, what if Sam Kinison and Roseanne Barr got married and had kids? And there was never an intent on the writers, from the writer's point of view, of actually hiring Sam and Roseanne. They're very headstrong people that couldn't fit into the mold of a sitcom, although Roseanne did it at some point. So the studio took them literally and went and offered Sam and Roseanne the job of, Sam and Roseanne, in theory, could have been Al and Peggy. Peggy and Al, and they turned them down. And when they did this, it was at the very beginning of the casting process, so it didn't quite interfere with casting per se, except that it raised the expectation in Fox's mind. We could have had Sam and Roseanne. Well, who else have you got? Kind of, it sort of puts that pressure. So we went into casting with that in mind. You want to just continue with the casting story?
Please. Yeah.
Okay. So Katey really wowed everybody. She was great. And the other parts were fairly easy to cast. I don't want to be dismissive to say, they were really talented artists who, who did them, David Garrison, Amanda Bearse, and so on. So, but casting Al, Al was very, very difficult. And they saw everybody possible. And people just were playing it like all wrong. When a lot of people were playing it like the Honeymooners, like Jackie Gleason. Other people were playing it like evil, like Jack Nicholson in The Shining. Here's John, So because it was just this edgy character. And the trick with an edgy character is you still have to like him. I mean, if you take Archie Bunker as the archetype, I mean, Carroll O'Connor is just, it's just brilliant because he's so irascible and he can be so nasty and racist and politically incorrect. And yet there's something endearing there. So we needed something like that for Al. And so the casting director found this guy, Ed O'Neill. He came in and he didn't necessarily want to do it. And he came in from a handball game and he was all sweaty. And he came into the interview. And what he did was he did this before he even said a word. It's a scene from the show. And in this particular scene, he walks in the door and he talks about his woes and so on and so forth. And he gave out this sigh as soon as he walked in. And when he gave out the sigh, Michael Moy, who was one of the creators of the show, said he knew exactly then that he was going to be our Al Bundy. And what the sigh said was when he walked in the door that he knew that his day, now that he was home, was going to be just as bad as his day was at work. It wasn't going to get any better. And that was like the key to the character. It's like he can't win home or work and so on and so forth. So they loved him and they brought him to the network. Okay, so you go to the network, and in this instance, the network has the final choice. You choose the people that you think are great, and you bring them all to the network, and they've got the yay or nay. They're the masters of this domain. They can make you or break you. And so you bring them to an audition where people deliver their lines live, and the network says, oh, we like him, we like her, we like this kid, we like that kid. And that's how a show gets cast. And there's a little negotiation as you go. So everybody gets approved. Katey gets approved. David Garrison, Amanda, the kids, who, by the way, who ended up as Bud and Kelly. We're not David and Christina. That's another story. So they bring in Ed and another character for Al Bundy. And so afterwards, they all turn to Barry Diller, who's this high-powered, brilliant, but kind of ruthless executive. And they say, well, what do you think? And he says, he's okay, but I think you can do better. And I don't really like him, but I think you guys do what you want. And he leaves the room. And everybody from Fox and everybody from our studio says, he's the guy, we're going to hire him. So after they hire him, they say they're going to hire him. The second highest Fox executive who was in the room, his name is Garth. And so he goes back to his office. Barry Diller calls him and he says, what did you do? Garth says, we hired Ed O'Neill. And Barry says, I said I didn't like him. Garth says, but you said do what you want. And Barry Diller says, well, I didn't really mean it. And so what he said, he couldn't go back on it. But what he did go back on, he called the studio the next day and he said, if you stay with Ed O'Neill, you can stay with Ed O'Neill if you want. But if you do, instead of having 13 on the air, you've got a pilot with an option for 12. So you with your pilot, if you don't prove it to me that he's the guy, you get nothing. If you pick somebody else that I like, you get your 13 on the air. Well, the studio decided to stay, and Ron and Michael, who created the show, decided to stay with Ed O'Neill. And so they went into the pilot taping, not knowing whether they were going to have just one pilot or whether they were going to be a series. And Ed himself didn't know it. I mean, Ed knew that Barry Diller didn't like him in particular, but it wasn't until he read my book that he knew the fact that they changed the option from 13 on the air to one with an option for 12. And he said he's glad he didn't know that, because if he had known that, it would have been a very tough night. So we shot the pilot. Everybody loved Ed. But now the casting problem becomes the kids, because in this show, because the parents are so kind of brutally honest and so tough and so, even though they love their family, it's tough love. The kids came across kind of weak. And so you felt bad for the kids, and the humor didn't land, vis-a-vis the kids. So we had to go out. So what we did was we decided to recast the kids and reshoot their scenes. And that's when we found David Faustino and Christina Applegate. David had been considered before, but passed on. And Christina Christina herself had passed on the material. She thought it was just not for her. And then she ended up loving it. And so we ended up with that's how we ended up with the entire cast, including David and Christina. But it wasn't easy. It was fraught with problems, and we overcame them.
Did anyone else know? I know Ed didn't know, but was any of the other cast aware that?
None of the other cast members knew, because we just figured it would just create too much of a tension. I mean, pilot nights themselves are very tense, and you go out there and you don't know if you're going to get laughs or not. I mean, it's not like you've seen these characters over and over like Seinfeld every week, and then, yeah, all you have to do is say something in your character. I don't mean all you have to do, but what you mainly have to do. And with a pilot, it's like, who are these people? On top of which, you're used to seeing Cosby and Family Ties, where everybody's nice to each other. And here you have this family who's, rude to each other, and what you find out at the core is that they love each other. So it's a big, big experiment under the best of circumstances. And under the circumstances of Married with Children, it was particularly edgy because A, the material was so edgy, and B, the whole question of Ed O'Neill was on the line. So that's how we went into the pilot.
It's interesting that they were all worried about Ed O'Neill, and then the original Kelly, Tina Kasperi, the original Bud, Hunter Carson.
Yes.
They end up being the ones. That's got to be a hard conversation. That's got to be a hard pill to like make it all the way through the pilot, and then, because it's got to be so hard to even get that far.
Yeah, I'm not sure who did that, casting director maybe, but I mean, it's, you could say it's particularly tough on kids because they're kids. You could also say they have their life in front of them. But yes, it must have been very, very hard on them and hard to tell them. And I'm sure a lot of what they were told was similar to what I said was, you did a really good job, but we need, edgier or this or that. But yeah, that must have been a tough one. One of the kids was the son of Hunter Carson, was the son of Karen Black, a showbiz mom, an actor, a famous actress. So anyway, fortunately, we were sort of insulated from those conversations.
Sorry to interrupt. I have to go console a couple kid actors that didn't get a job on Married with Children. No, but I do want to thank you all for your support of the sponsors. When you support the sponsors, you're supporting us here at Classic Conversations. And that's how we keep the lights on. And now back to my conversation with Richard Gurman. So David Faustino, who had auditioned and then didn't get it.
Right.
What made them, and just after shooting the pilot, did they realize, oh, no, that is what we needed? Was it something like that?
He was amongst the people that were memorable. So they brought him back in, and Michael told me that when he auditioned again, he just had this devil in his eye, which is kind of his character. He's sort of like, oh, this sweet kid, but he can be poison too. It just came through, and then he still had to go to the network, as did Christina, and audition with other kids. And Christina similarly had they had never seen Christina, because she hadn't come in to interview. But when they saw her, they saw right away that she had this sort of this tough character. It was all, you wanted kids that would also give the parents problems, because nothing was going to be easy in this family. And that proved to be true for 11 years.
It's funny when you think back on this cast now. They were not names then, and they all went on to have such levels of success.
Monster careers. I mean, Ed O'Neill going to do 11 more, Married with Children being 11 years is a huge career series for any given actor. The fact that he went into another series that went another 11 years is almost unfathomable. And Katey with her biker show, and Christina with Dead to Me and her movies. I mean, David has forged ahead, and he's done some animated voices, and he's sort of had a hip hop career too. I mean, he didn't take off like the other ones did, but yeah, it's pretty amazing. They went from absolutely not being known at all to being household names like twice.
I grew up, how I was introduced to Ed O'Neill or Katey Sagal or Christina Applegate was through Married with Children.
Right.
But like when you watch Ed O'Neill, but then I also lived through the whole Modern Family.
Right.
When you go back and you watch him as Al Bundy, you realize like how, and Katey, like you realize like how amazing they really were as those characters. Like when you can, you know what I mean? Like, because he was so different on Modern Family.
What they brought to it and how deeply they, I think part of what you're saying is how deeply they committed to those characters without winking. They just played those characters knowing that he was telling his son that his car is more important to him than his son, and you just with a straight face. And, that he's, he loves his son and he'd do anything for him. But, just to go through those motions in those scenes, it's really a testament to their acting ability. And from the standpoint of writers, they gave us, we write the scripts and the words are there and we know what the characters are, but they give you just as much in return and to elevate it. And they also do it in a way that suggests what you might do in the next script or in the next scene. Katey brought all kinds of things to the character. We wrote her, Michael and Ron wrote her as she is, this kind of lazy, doesn't do housework, sits on the couch, watches TV, eats bonbons and so on and so forth. But, and she took that and then she had this notion but she thinks she's kind of cool and she's sexy and she wants to wear, tight pants and do a strut and walk a certain way. And she brought all that to the character, and Ed brought his kind of disgruntled, every man, kind of the world on his shoulders. And David had this kind of feisty, the whole hip hop thing that he brought into it was something that we hadn't thought of. And that was sort of blowing up in the culture. And he brought that to it. And Christina found a way to play a dumb person smart is the only way I can say it. And she brought that, and David and Amanda and Ted, had all their qualities too. I don't want to diminish them, but just in terms of the core group, the process of making a show, which I talk about in the book, is, you write the scripts, they rehearse, you go watch their rehearsal, you see what they do, you see what doesn't work, you see what they may have added, you change that. And it's this alive process. You keep changing up until the last minute. Even during the show, you have an opportunity, if a joke doesn't work in front of the live audience, to change a joke or change a line and, right up until the last minute. So it's this very alive thing, and you need a responsive cast and they need a responsive writing staff. Like a movie, you got to wrap, you've got to finish months before you start shooting it. And I know they change stuff right up to the last minute. But in this case, you really can't, it really is alive.
Amazing. All right. So you launch Married with Children. Everything goes. End of season 1. Let's see what it said. 111th of 125 shows. Not
No.
great at the time, but we know the future. We know the future where it goes on to be mammoth. But people are resonating. People see themselves because there's something about this counter programming and this parody, but it's more real. That's kind of like, I think, the joke of it. It's a surreal version of real, but like.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
People who do like it absolutely love it. So, we're not completely catching on, but two things help us. One is, it is very low in the whole scale, but we're on Fox. And so in Fox's universe, it was relatively high in their universe, which is a low bar. But, that was one thing that sustained us at the end of the first season.
So you have a great story about the counter programming that we were talking about with season 2 with Santa Claus and the difference between how Family Ties approached the traditional Christmas episode and how Married with Children approached it. And I love that story of you guys killing Santa Claus.
Yeah, well, in typical network sitcoms, Santa, Christmas time is a time to come and embrace and so on and so forth. We, as I mentioned, try to do some counter programming. As it happens, our Christmas show this year ran at 8:30 at exactly the same time as Family Ties Christmas show. On Family Ties, Michael J. Fox character Alex Keaton gets a job as Santa at a department store, and he befriends this kid and unites the kid with her father who can't be there for Christmas, and somehow they come together at the Keaton family house for a Christmas dinner. Very Hallmark Christmas, and very wholesome. In Married with Children, we do something a little different. They're all sitting around the couch, Marcy and Steve and Peg and Al and the kids. And Al is griping that the Santa at the competing mall is, for a publicity stunt, is jumping out of an airplane and handing out leaflets for discounts at the mall. And it's on TV, and he can't bear to watch it because it just means more business for the other mall. And all of a sudden you hear that the plane has gone adrift, that Santa's chute isn't opening, and that he's falling out of the sky. And then you see behind you this blur, and you see this thud, and you realize that Santa has fallen to his death in the Bundy's backyard. And that's our Christmas show. It was a smack in the face, a kick in the groin to the way network television does their show. And in typical fashion, Al never comes out a winner exactly, even though it's counter kind of programming. The coroner comes and they're taking Santa away, and the kids from the neighborhood all rush to the Bundy front door because they saw Santa fall and they want to know if he's all right or not. So Al has to pretend that he's Santa to prove to the kids that he's all right. So he has to take the suit off of dead Santa, put it on, and go out and talk to the kids and pretend he's Santa, and at which point he insults the kids in his own style. But in any event, that was our Christmas show, and a just perfect example of the kind of counter programming. And you watch Family Ties and you get this wholesome show where, Alex brings two families together, married with children. We kill Santa. So you couldn't get a better example of counter programming than our Christmas shows.
Love it. And then season 3 also brought Michigan's own Terry Racolta. Am I saying that?
Yeah.
So we get a protest going. Sorry that it came from my state. But oddly, it had the kind of negative. It sounds like it ruffled a bunch of feathers, but then eventually kind of actually drew. It was sort of the attention that you needed to get a lot of eyeballs.
Michigan housewife with political connections watched a particular episode, and there were vibrator jokes, there were stripper jokes, there were negligee jokes. There was, I won't say typical married fare, but not atypical either. So she saw a Married with Children episode. She was expecting something else. She complained to advertisers, and her story just took off. Like somebody now, you'd say it was viral. There wasn't internet at the time, or there was very little, but it was on the front page of the New York Times. It was on Nightline. It was on the morning talk shows. All of a sudden, this one woman was taking on this show and the network. And she got to the advertisers. She got to Procter and Gamble. She got to General Motors and Coca-Cola. I can't remember exactly which ones, but she got them to say that they would hold back their sponsorship until the network did something about it. And what the network did was they changed the time slot from 8:30 to 9, and then they said they'd look at some scripts, but they didn't really do too much. And what happened, as Jeff was hinting at, was that all of the attention from the news, from the media, got a huge amount of publicity for the show. And a lot of people tuned in that weren't otherwise tuned. It's like, what the hell's going on Married with Children that this woman is so upset? And what they saw, they liked. I mean, they could come and still also be upset, but what they saw, they liked, and our ratings took off from there. So she almost got the show canceled because at the time we weren't doing that well. And if you get to the advertisers, that's the bottom line of the network. So she potentially got us canceled, but she ultimately gave us a huge boost, and we just kind of kept going from there. So we owed a debt of gratitude to her.
Because this is now probably 1989, 90.
Yeah, it's the third year in.
So like you said, I mean, like no internet, no social media. Yeah, it's impressive, right? I mean, you could do that now and like it wouldn't be as impressive because things can catch fire real fast.
Right, because you could plant it, and you'd also be competing with everybody else that was planting everything too. But yes, it was very impressive. And we went from thinking, we might get canceled. We had no idea. Apparently that's not an uncommon thing to happen when something gets negative attention, and they can have a positive result in the media. But no one knew how it would play out with our show, but it played out great.
All right. Thank you, Terry. Season 4. All right. So, you were gone when David Garrison left.
Yeah.
So David Garrison, season 4, decides he's going to leave. So this is kind of disrupts the whole Fab 4 kind of momentum you have of the main 4 characters.
Good way of putting it.
And then he's gone in season 5 and beyond with an occasional guest star. But I get that he just wanted to leave. But I mean, it's also hard to believe too. I mean, I believe it, but like,
I know. I mean, it's like most people who are on a sitcom, if it takes off like that and it ended up running 11 years, it's their gravy train. It's defining. It's exactly what they want. David, bless him, had a Broadway career before this, and he was tired of the sitcom life, and he wanted to get back to New York, and he wanted to get back to his Broadway career, which he did, and he did very well. He was in Wicked. He was in a lot of things. And then he also ended up doing a little TV too. So there was no sense of, A, he wasn't fired. B, he had Ron and Michael's blessing to leave. It's difficult when a main character like that leaves because, and particularly in our case, a lot of the humor of Al was playing off of Steve. Steve was this yuppie banker. Al is just this down on his luck shoe salesman, who can barely pay the bills and so on and so forth. And Steve drives a Mercedes and, just aspires to all these things with Marcy. And a lot of the tension between Steve and Al drove the stories. I mean, it was an outlet for Al to unleash his fury. And it was a place you could go to for jokes. And with him leaving, it wasn't just that we lost the character, we lost the character relationship between Al and Steve, which made it difficult. It was eased a little bit by the fact that he agreed to stay for half of the season. And so we could write him out progressively, which we did. And then we didn't add Jefferson until a season later. 2 things sort of coincide. After 4 or 5 years, the premise of shows, you kind of run out of story. You've done so many of the same stories over and over. Shows tend to get bigger and broader. Ours became even bigger and broader, so to speak, because Steve, in a certain way, grounded Al, because Al had this target, and his fury was unleashed on Steve, and you could work out the stories through that. Not always, but when Steve left, we found we needed Al to have more targets, and we went to the shoe store more, and it was the customers, or it was the phone company, or it was kind of part of the title, Al Bundy, Married to Someone versus the World. It sort of became Al versus the world, and the show became a little more, as off-center as it was, it still was kind of grounded and had a certain reality to it, sort of a certain grittiness to it. And right about the time that Steve left, and some of this would have happened anyway. As I said, most shows after 4, 5, 6 years start to get broader. But Steve leaving hastened the broadness of our show. And we still did some great shows that were very, we did shows with Martians. We did shows, where they get stuck in a freeway, they get into fistfights in the middle of a freeway. And I mean, we still did absolutely great shows, but it definitely hastened the broadness of the series.
And then Amanda Bearse starts directing. She'll go on to direct 30 episodes. And Christina Applegate's becoming a movie star, right? She's breaking out a little bit as well. Did that impact it? I know Amanda Bearse, there was some internal stripes with Ed O'Neill.
Yeah, I don't think with Christina. I think Christina, she became a movie star. The only thing that I remember, it was much later, around the 9th or the 10th season, she came back from having done a movie and she had her hair completely cut short and she wanted to stay with the short hair. And we just thought that because she had just done so well in this movie, I forget what movie it was, but we actually had her get a wig, which she obliged. Christina was never a problem in that regard. What happened with Amanda and Ed, and I wasn't going to write about it that much, but I ended up writing about it because it's in the news. It's not a secret. A lot of times when actors have an artistic bent and they use their acting time on the stage as a training ground for them to become a director, and so Amanda had aspirations to be a director, and what better training ground than right there? And she even took some courses and so on. So she negotiated a deal where she got to direct X number of episodes per season. And after she proved herself that first season, then she got more and more and more. And she was actually a very good director. What happened was it sort of threw Ed off and the balance of the relationships off, because here Amanda was this fifth character in an ensemble where Ed was the king. And all of a sudden, she's giving him directions on what to do and how to do it. She's the director and she has to, and he's professional and he's got to do it. So it hastened. They had a decent relationship up to that time, but it caused friction between the two of them. They ended up sort of dancing around each other for the rest of the series, really. And some of it, Ed said, was very specific to episodes, to certain ways that she was directing, and that, he said he would have told any director to do it differently. But he admits that part of it was having to listen to her, and instead of her being part of an ensemble, she was the head voice on the set. Then the other thing that happened that I reference in the book is that that caused bad blood between Amanda and Ed, is that Amanda came out as being gay very early in Hollywood history, 4 years before Ellen, and she was very accepted on the set, and she was very upfront about it, and she was very outspoken about it, and was very much a role model for other people in the industry. And it didn't affect her character pretty much. If you knew she was gay, there's so many actors that are gay. It's not like you can't play straight characters. And she kept playing it the way she was playing it. But she didn't invite Ed to the wedding. There was always already a little bad blood between them. So she didn't invite Ed to the wedding. And he sat her down and he said, and it was causing friction on the set, and we had them talk it through. She said, Ed, I just thought when my bride-to-be, spouse-to-be, and I were walking down the aisle in church in matching white tuxedos, that you wouldn't. The reason I didn't invite you was that I thought you wouldn't have been able to stop cracking up and just making a scene, and I didn't want that at my wedding. So Ed took umbrage and he says, "What are you talking about? Two women walking down the aisle in white tuxedos." And then he started to picture that in his head. And he started laughing out loud right then as we were talking. And then he said, something, Amanda, you were probably right in not in excluding me from your wedding. He was honest about it. From that point on, there was definitely, as there is on some shows, there was bad blood. But they were both very professional, and they played their scenes like Al and Marcy. They had a rivalry on the set as well, and they were very professional. There's some bad blood between them, but it wasn't like it was going to have to cancel the show or anything like that. That's that story.
Thank you for sharing that. It's so all right. So Ron and Michael are running the show, and then Michael leaves, Ron runs it. Michael leaves, Ron comes back, and then season 10, they hand you the keys with Kim Weiskopf. How did it feel to finally be kind of?
It was tough. It was and I think I use this phrase in the book, is like I was a substitute teacher. The cast was so. First of all, historically, people who create shows stay with shows for a few years. They don't always stay as long as Ron and Michael did, but they did stay with the show, and they were brilliant at what they did. And the cast imprinted on them, and doing a show, being an actor, it can be a very insecure thing. Ron and Michael instilled a lot of confidence in them. So all of a sudden, Ron and Michael were gone. Michael was a consultant, and I was running the show with this guy, Kim Weiskopf, a fine writer who had been on the show the year or two before. So the cast was a little testy, and started feeling that maybe the scripts weren't, quite the same. And, and we had Michael to back us up, and we got through it. And it was a bumpy year. And one of the decisions that we made that caused the bumpiness was we had always had Katey's parents from this Wanker County, which was this fictional, dog patch kind of, where everyone married their cousin and so on. It was just like there's kind of this crazy backwoods county. And we could make jokes about them off camera about who was doing what to whom and where and so on and so forth. But we brought them, we brought her father and her mother. The mother never appeared. She stayed upstairs, but the father, we brought them in front of the camera. And I think that was one of the mistakes that we had. And the other thing is that at 9th, 10th year of a show, it's hard to keep it fresh. And, and so that combined with neither Ron nor Michael running the show, made for a bumpy year, but they were still ultimately very professional, and we did a lot of great shows and we got through it.
I think you're awesome. I think it was all great. It's funny, like when you're living through a moment, like we always say like when you're watching Seinfeld, oh, at the end, at the end, it was like, but it's like any show. But if you watch it now and you don't know what season it was, you're like, you just enjoy the show. You know what I mean? It's only when you're like kind of watching it, comparing it real time or is, real season to season. Yeah. Once you kind of look back, you're like, oh, the awesomeness is always there.
Thank you.
Okay, then we have season 11. That's the end. And then no finale. They kind of pulled the rug out.
Yeah, season 11, I pulled back. I was just consulting, and this very funny woman, Pam Eels, came in and she ran the show for season 11. And then they had moved the time slots around and the ratings were kind of going down, but the network couldn't make a decision about the idea that they were going to cancel the show. Usually when a show runs 11 seasons, you get the opportunity and it gets canceled. Seinfeld, a lot of shows, you get the opportunity to do a finale, to do a closing episode that kind of wraps things up. For better or worse, they're often not that good, by the way. Newhart was great. Seinfeld, not so great. But it gives closure to both the actors and the feeling is also to the audience. So there wasn't enough time to make that decision. They canceled the show without doing a final episode. And in fact, the actors didn't even find out that they were canceled until months later. And they found out through weird sources. Ed was on vacation someplace and a honeymooning couple said they had heard it on the radio. Katey was on a TV show and someone told her, as was Christina. And by now, at this point, there's a lot of internet presence. There wasn't at the beginning, but, and you get fans saying, they were cheated out of the final episode and so on and so forth. So there was no opportunity to have a final episode. There were a couple of episodes that I felt, and I talk about in the book, that gives some closure, a show where Christina almost gets married and it's called off, but she ends up being proud to be a Bundy in a way that isn't usually discussed on the series. And part of the impetus of the book was to give some closure, to talk about kind of what happened behind the scenes and to let fans look back on it and, sort of take a breath and just sort of get the big picture that they sort of never got. Yeah, I mean, there was a bit of a kerfuffle about not having a final show, but the actors and they all felt there was it's kind of a maliciousness on the part of and it's sort of a little Rodney Dangerfield that we don't get enough respect to have a final show. I'm sure some of it was a business decision, as well, that they really couldn't figure it out at the time. So anyway, it kind of fell through the cracks, and a lot of fans were upset about it.
Well, those fans can take solace in your book. Everyone go get it. Married with Children versus the World. The inside story of the Shotcom that launched Fox and changed TV comedy forever. Longest title ever, Richard. Longest title ever.
Well, I think Married with Children versus the World becomes the...
Good. I love it.
Yeah. Thanks for being so informed on your questions, too. I appreciate it.
Oh, hey, I love reading the book, and it's a great topic, and you're awesome. And thanks for sharing all your stories. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. How amazing was Richard Gurman? Are you ready? Ready to re-binge all of Married with Children? I know you are. Grab the book, Married with Children versus the World, the inside story of the Shotcom that launched Fox and changed TV comedy forever, 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 forever. I can't afford actual effects. But anyway, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so if you haven't watched Married with Children, definitely now's a good time to binge watch that as well. So, all right, I'll put a link to the book in the show notes. Wow, that interview just kind of flew by, huh? It's over. I know. That means the interview's over. The show is this episode's over. Huge thank you again to Richard Gurman for sharing so many great stories with us. And a huge thank you to all of you for coming back week after week. It means the world to me, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Classic Conversations. If you like what you heard, don't be shy and give us a follow on your favorite podcast app. Also, why not go ahead and tell all your friends about the show? You strike us as the kind of person that people listen to. Thanks in advance for spreading the word, and we'll catch you next time on Classic Conversations.